So welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast. This is where we explore the new game-changing understanding that can unlock new levels of performance, resourcefulness, and well-being in the workplace. Join us if you want to be part of the new breed of leaders in business. Join us if you're fed up with the conventional echo chamber. And join us if you want to be part of the new revolution in understanding how the mind works and recognize that we are more than just our psychology and that can lead to better results.
Hello and welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast series. So today I am lucky enough to have another episode where I get to interview a wonderful human called Garry Turner. And for those of you who are dedicated followers of the podcast, you might recognize his name because he was on the show about 18 months ago after he'd attended one of the Quality of Mind 3-day open programs. And in that episode, he told us all about what had changed for him as an individual and as a person as a result of coming on the program. Now, the reason I got Garry back is having been observing and having the odd conversation with Garry about what he's been up to in the world. It's been such a wonderful thing to witness and be part of some of Garry's emergence, evolving, and what he's up to. And to so much so that I just wanted to get him back on the podcast show so we can have a more of a discussion about it and he can share all the wonderfulness that he's up to. So, Garry, wonderful, beautiful to see you again. How are you?
Very good to be back with you, Piers. I can't believe it's only been 18 months. It's incredible what's been going on.
We've also had a little pandemic chucked in there mix as well, which has made things more weird and wonderful. So Garry, can you give a very short kind of synopsis for anyone that hasn't actually heard the first episode that we did together? Just a little synopsis on what's been going on for you over the last few years. And then I really want to get into how you've been seeing things in the last sort of year or so.
Yeah, sure. And again, thanks for inviting me back on, Piers. So last 18 months since we last spoke, it's been a real... I love the way you use the word emergence, because I think that's literally what it's been, is an emergence of getting increasingly out of my own way so that I sense into like the rest of the world outside of sort of Garry's sort of I'll be okay when, you know. So I think a letting go is probably a really simple synopsis of the last 18 months. I've increasingly been letting go of attachment to the job that I do, letting go of attachment to when I write a book, one day I'll be good enough. So there's been so many things I've been undulating around the last 18 months. But what I found where I am today is I'm getting clearer and clearer about the work I want to be doing as a result of shedding a lot of those things that I'd innocently attached to up until we met, 18 months ago. But also since then as well. So I think this letting go of attachment has been a major theme of the last 18 months.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot in that because I think, you, prior to us working together 18 months ago, if I'm right in saying, Garry, you were someone who works in a big organization, with lots of business coming from that. You'd had your own mental health issues. You always wanted to do a great job and were striving. There's a lot of striving going on, quite a lot of struggling going on. And, sort of you then, this is sort of 18 months ago, but pre that, you kind of had some big releases and, yeah, I don't need to be like that anymore. And that was a big personal shift for you. But what I've been noticing more recently is you, as you just said, you're seeing the world differently in how you want to make a change in your own organization, in society, in the world differently now. So it's sort of moved from the personal to the systemic. Is that a fair way of saying it?
Yeah, it's a brilliant summary, definitely. And what I found with that journey actually, Piers, interestingly, is it's almost an oxymoron. It's a paradox. Like I'm feeling more and more alive and more free the more I sense into the system part, which is really fascinating.
So let's break that down for people a bit if they're wondering what we're on about. So, so I think it's a lot of people might have, seen the benefits of quality of mind for an individual, right? So they get more greater mental well-being, greater clarity, creativity, resilience. That might help their leadership, their teamwork, might help them at home, with the parents, with their spouse, with their health. All those lovely things can come from having a realization about the principles behind quality of mind. Now, Garry, what are you seeing about the nature of change at a more systemic level, a more societal level, or an organizational level now? What are you seeing about this fresh than you did a couple of years ago?
There's two major factors, and it's sensing into and understanding the interdependence of everything and the interrelation of everything. So whether it be animal, non-human, human beings, plants, tree, like literally everything is connected, like everything. And when we don't realize that, we see things as separate. So the car, the house, the job, the partner, the dog, whatever. And the systemic shift for me the last 18 months with the help, this work and other work has been, oh my goodness, life is so much richer while we're living it when we realize that all of this stuff is connected and it isn't separate. And that's been a huge, huge, huge part of that shift for me, Piers.
Now, if someone was going, okay, I hear your words, but what does that mean? What does that mean day to day for you, that now you know that everything's connected? What does that mean for you? How does that turn up? What's the benefit of that?
So the benefit of that is empathy. It's a feeling. It's an embodiment of, actually, for me to get this iPhone, to make it really practical for your listeners, for me to have this iPhone in my hand means we've extracted oil out of the ground. And that oil has come from Mother Nature. And that oil at the moment can risk displacement of indigenous tribes in different parts of the world, in the Amazon, who have lived a certain way for thousands of years and have a certain knowledge that comes with being an indigenous tribe. And in addition, we're mining rare earth metals in Africa to be able to actually go into making a mobile phone, to make it work. So suddenly it's like, oh my goodness, for me to have a mobile phone isn't just this thing that arrives in my hand from Amazon. It's a combination of a range of different raw materials from all around the world, which are not just raw materials, they are having an impact on the part of the world where they're mined or where they're extracted or where they're collected. So that is not a thought process I had 18 months ago, Piers. And that's a very real, so this is not just, it is the climate thing is a huge passion of mine the last 18 months, which I didn't have 18 months ago. And again, because I didn't sense into it. I didn't think about what I just described, Piers. I saw a mobile phone and upgrade as a mobile phone and upgrade. That's fine. That's what it is. I didn't think about the connectivity of all of that mobile phone.
Now, okay, great. So you're sort of seeing beyond so your own woes now have kind of disappeared. So now you're looking more wider, a wider perspective on the world. Now, does that mean, I think you're going to answer this in a way that's going to be helpful for this. But does that mean that you're going, oh my God, I've got to worry about the climate, my iPhone being unsustainable, lack of diversity, racism, all the isms? Does that now suddenly mean you've got all the isms on your plate to deal with?
I'm laughing because I have had that certainly since the murder of George Floyd, like that was a very real issue for me. Yes. However, coming into our call today, actually, especially like this is divine timing, Piers, because this morning on a walk, I watched an incredible video, and I just had this lightening of all of those isms. Because don't get me wrong, like what's going on in the world, what we perceive, what we think is true around all this stuff, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of pain. We can't get rid of, we can't ignore that. But where is that coming from? Is it an outside force causing all that pain? Or is it actually an inside belief system that we're holding onto with clenched fists that from the inside out that creates that pain? So there's a lot of stuff in that. So I'd say I'm still very aware and I still sense injustice. And we do need to be more inclusive. We should be designing around our people. There's a lot of stuff I do believe. I believe we can organize better as human beings. But the isms are not causes. The isms are a symptom of something else. And we don't look at it that way.
There's so much in what you just said. Where do I go? So I think there's a fascinating bit around cause and symptom. right? So what you're saying, that what I think I heard you say there was all the isms that we may see and go, well, that doesn't look very fair, doesn't look right, injustice, right? That people might want to do something about, and it might become a cause for someone, a purpose, a cause, a calling, a protest, right? Now, if we tackle those symptoms straight on, and there's lots of protests going on at the moment, without seeing what they're symptoms of, I think what you're pointing to is that's going to get us in our head and that's going to cause separation, and that actually ain't going to help apart from just wind people up.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And I want to speak to this as well, if I may, Piers. I've really struggled the last 12 months with this, from the point of view that having a knowing around this work, around the quality of mind, knowing that in the moment, certain decisions can be made that others then believe. So give me an example like the redlining in the US earlier in the last century. There were laws put in place to stop people of color accessing finance.
Yeah.
Like that is something that happened.
Yeah.
However, that happened in the moment based on a certain subset of history. It's not something that is happening every single moment of every single part of our life from then on in. And I think that there's this really interesting tension between what happened once versus what's really happening now. And what's really happening now is the maintenance and continuing of that belief system, which could be changed in a moment. Like if we suddenly just sat here, like in the moment, all of that could shift. All of that,
and therefore, from what you're saying is that so the perception of inequality, there were lots of actions that happened centuries ago or decades ago that, obviously aren't necessarily happening now, but the perception of inequality is still therefore manifesting itself in inequality in different ways. Is that what you're saying?
Partly, but I think where I'm trying to come to with this, Piers, is in the moment with this work, which I'm understanding, the systems, they're not real. Like the borders of like each country border isn't real. Passport control isn't real. All of those borders that are made up by human beings to define a boundary of something, none of it's real.
If you went to space and looked down, you wouldn't see it.
Exactly. And I always think about exactly that. And I heard that from the first Iranian astronaut, female astronaut, when she spoke to Deepak Chopra and said that. Like when you're up on the space station looking back, there are no borders. So we've got this really interesting paradox of there are not any borders, but we collectively believe an illusion that there are.
Yeah, which fits into one of the core foundations of quality of mind, which is real but never true. So, and people who are familiar with the podcast will have listened to episodes we've done on that we say that the way that humans create a reality is real but never true. So it's real, if you perceive inequality and you have inequality, that's real. No one is saying, no, you're pretending, no, you're making that up. Absolutely real. You'll fear it, you'll feel it, see it, hear it, smell it. It's not objectively true. Right? So, and when people see, and nothing, it's not like, well, some things are objective true and some things aren't. No, nothing is. But it's where collective consciousness or tribes of collective consciousness see things as real and true that causes problems. Now, I think what we're saying is, from our perspective, we'd love to see less of that in the world, less perceived inequality in the world. But how you go about that is the question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what you were starting to get to earlier on, which is, okay, well, I see them as symptoms of people's thinking in the moment, as opposed to people seeing what we're really made of. Is that right, Garry? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No. You're exactly right. And I think this is, so I've spoken a lot on diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations in the last 12 months. I've been very grateful to be part of them. And my approach to this has always been, it's just words, but root cause. Like what is, what's actually, as you use your language for quality of mind, what is upstream? Like what can we draw on that can help, to use words again, heal? Like, because ultimately what we're looking for here is healing. That's what all of these symptoms are. They're symptoms of something that disease, something that isn't working. So actually, how do you heal? You heal from love, you heal from connection, you heal from understanding, you heal from empathy. You can't heal from anger, fear, and distrust.
No. And therefore, to make it a little bit more practical, one of the things I often, talk about is when we are promoting a cause, what is our own aperture? The language I use is what aperture, what quality of mind are we in? Where's it coming from? Because there's kind of high quality of mind protesting and there's low quality of mind protesting. Low quality of mind protesting would be driven by I need to fix this, they're wrong, we're right, all that kind of stuff. And it's coming from that sort of, it would look very justified for someone. It would look quite kind of, this needs to happen. They're wrong. They're not listening, right? And it would come from there, and it's quite protesty, to use that word. Now, when we're looking to enable or looking at something from a higher aperture, knowing more about what the true self is, understanding that we're all made of love and thoughts are real and never true, etc., there's a different space that activism comes from. And maybe it's not even called activism then. There's a different space that protest comes from. It comes from seeking to understand. It comes from seeking to see through the illusions of perception. And it comes with love, to sum all that up, what I've just said, and that creates a different level of behavior and dialogue, I think. And from that, things can dissolve. And that's how I think it's going to change, personally. But the problem is, I think that at the other end, in the slightly more contracted aperture for people, and probably if they were listening to this, the personal mind will justify why it needs to be this way, the other way, the kind of slightly more wokey, fake wokeism, rah, rah, rah way. The mind will go, well, it has to, or that they won't listen, they won't change, the white middle-aged man in America won't, whatever. And it looks very justified to go the other way. Now, once I think you've experienced it the more high aperture way, it's like, oh, yeah. Does that resonate with you, Garry?
It does resonate a lot on multiple levels, Piers. And also, I'm continuously dropping in and out of high and low aperture, and I have done the last 12 months. So yeah. I think the big thing with it, so you're definitely 100%, like this coming place from a place of understanding, empathy, love, connection, willingness to hear someone else. Like, it's been a massive shift. And that's where I've been the last 12, 18 months since we first spoke, is almost like having the first experience with you helped me get out of my own way in my head initially and go, oh, okay, there's something more than just my experience. There's a load of other experiences that are quite interesting and curious to explore. And now I'm in this space of, okay, there does seem to be a lot of inequity. There does seem to be a lot of injustice in the world. What's going to solve that? More of the perceived same, or getting into dialogue and connection with people more around how they see the world or what their experience has been of life? And I think that's the root cause. That's the sort of root, the upstream. Actually, we are all connected. Everything is connected back to where we started. Like everything, animal, non-animal, human, plant, like trying not to be too philosophical, but it quite literally is scientifically all connected. Like this is science as well as like sort of spirituality. You can't avoid it. Yeah,
absolutely. And actually, even the word connection has changed for me. What that even means. So connection can imply two separate things needing to join, right? So if you connect two pieces of a jigsaw puzzle or two pieces of Lego, you are taking two separate things and connecting them. Mm-hmm. Now, actually, what we're not really actually saying now, are we? We're probably using the word badly, or we're using the wrong word, because there's nothing to connect between everything because it already is. So you can't connect what was never separate.
That's a brilliant point. Yeah.
So you can't connect. It's like, oh, I must connect, two separate things. No. I used to say it like that. I used to think I need to get in connection with. Well, actually now I'm like, well, no, I can't. Because as you know, I'm a non-dual fan. So consciousness is primary. So we already are it. We are source, right? And then the conceptual mind, the personal mind, the separate self, whatever you want to call it, creates the illusion of separation in a contracted aperture. And then it looks separate. So it looks like you and I are separate, and then we need to connect. Whereas actually what we're saying is, no, we already are one. We just have to reveal that.
That word is really good. And I've got our mutual friend, Helen Amory. She actually joined me on my podcast previously.
I listened to it.
She used that word, which is brilliant. It's a revealing of consciousness. It's a revealing of connection, not a...
And actually,
a great word.
Garry, I'll be honest here, and I can be honest with you. I'm not a fan of your new podcast title.
Yeah.
You know why, don't you?
Yeah, for sure. I prefer Helen's as well, to be honest. Revealing consciousness is a far more correct.
So
would be a better
just to tell listeners about this, because this is relevant, not just me and Garry having a chat here, but so there's two things about Garry's podcasting. So I think which is very fascinating, because when we first met Garry, we did a podcast called Value Through Vulnerability, which was all about seeing the importance and value in organizations of people being vulnerable, which creates more trust and connection and that kind of thing. And that's what you were on about back then. And from where you were back then, it made total sense. And I could see how it was an important thing. Now, in the last 18 months, because of what's been shifting for you, you see those things, having more vulnerability and connection and trust in organizations as symptoms of a higher quality of mind. Mm-hmm. And now you've created your new podcast called Activating Consciousness, which is I'd recommend it to people, put it in the show notes, which is all about looking at systemic change through consciousness. Now, the thing that I'm kind of having a go at Garry about here is just a very nuanced of the word activating, because of the point we just said that you can't really activate something that's already there. So Garry, I'm saying it with love that I don't really mind your name, but of activating, but it's an interesting point, isn't it?
It's a great point. And again, this is the beauty of this human experience. It proves it's in the moment. Like in that moment, I went, okay, let's do that. Didn't think twice about it. It felt good.
Yeah.
It felt like the journey it needs to go on. And actually the fact you and I are now having this discussion about the title, connection, activating versus revealing, shows why we need to be having discussions with each other and leaning in to hear one another's experience, because that's how we sense back to that innate connection.
But also, it might be relevant for listeners who think, okay, how do I have more of that coming from love? How do I activate? So let's answer the question. Imagine someone's going, no, I like activating, Piers. You're wrong. Gary's got it right. How do I activate my consciousness to come from a space of curiosity, neutrality, and love that can make some of the changes that we talked about? Let's answer that question or talk about it. How do you think now? I suppose the question really is, what do you think change is made of now? How does it work for you when you're looking at change now?
Change is networked. Really simply, that's probably when you think about like it makes me laugh that change management just is the most ridiculous oxymoron in my mind now. How you can try and manage change is just like, there's billion-dollar industries built on it. So for me, it's a network. Change now is that's that connection piece again, and not connection, as you said. It's literally networked. So actually change happens through networks. So actually by me being in dialogue with other human beings that are open-minded, open-hearted, can reimagine or are imagining something that we collectively feel is healthy. Like that's how change works for me now. Like it's not about coercing. It's not about pushing or influencing. It's actually, okay, this is something I think could be a helpful change. Like, are there other people in my network or around the world that think similarly or differently? So there's a heavily network.
So that's how change would start to happen in an organization or a system.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So just we'll come to that a bit in a moment, but let's just get back to the bit about if I'm someone thinking, okay, I would, that someone maybe who gets too caught up by the isms or finds it difficult to get out of judgment and be in that neutral, curious, loving place, and wants to, in inverted commas, connect to their consciousness more or reveal consciousness. Let's look at that bit at the very individual, for a person who's listening to this going, yeah, I'd love to get in that space more. How does it look like to you, Garry, that turns up?
It's really funny. Today, it's been curious, honestly. It's not a causal thing. It just happens through exploration, through being curious, through there's not a thing that I can point to and say it's that. It just shows up. Yeah, it just emerges, to come back to that word again.
And it's funny that, isn't it? Because I think we've been so conditioned that it should be way more complicated than that and way more doable than that. Right? So, if I want to be like that, I need to do something or beable, actually. There's a sort of have, do, be, things we used to talk about. But what we're really saying is it sort of turns up when we accidentally step out of the way. And we see that we are, to use a metaphor, we are the screen, not the movie. Right, but the screen gets so blurred by the movie. We get so absorbed by the content of our experiences, or the thoughts and the feelings and perceptions and psychological objects within experience, that we can't see what we truly are, which is the screen, if you like. And in moments when that becomes, the content drops away, or you can see that what you are is the screen, you have a different relationship to your content. And the personal mind sort of quietens down, and we're more in that place of neutral flow, I suppose. So it's a dissolving and a revealing rather than a do, isn't it?
100%. I can bring it to life if you don't mind, Piers.
Please.
And it involved tears. So I was out running 2 weeks ago, went for a jog. It tends to be the time when I'm at my highest aperture. I'm not reading a book, I'm not online, just literally running in freedom outside. And I just had this overwhelming, I just had tears. Just started crying, they were happy tears. They weren't sad, but I just literally just slowed down my run. And I just felt into why am I suddenly crying? Why have I got these sort of happy tears? And it's just this absolute, honestly, since we had our time, since I worked with you and had that massive realization, it's probably the next most significant thing for me 2 weeks ago, where I just literally had this complete opening of my whole being, and just broke down, but not in a bad, just these happy tears just flew out of me. And it was just, I can feel it now as I share it with you. It was just an incredibly freeing moment that was not caused by me reading a book, trying to find it, searching for it underneath the kitchen table. It just emerged at that moment. And yeah, it was incredible.
It's beautiful how, in one level, ordinary that is, in that you're just going for a run, not doing anything, and you weren't looking to do that. You weren't going for a run for that to happen. You weren't, it wasn't in your diary. Have big moment where I feel, expansiveness of consciousness. It just turns up. And I think what you're saying in that, Garry, is that Garry actually didn't do that, or Garry wasn't even there in that. There was a dissolving of Garry too, that the self dissolved in that.
It all sounds very ethereal, doesn't it?
Doesn't it?
But yes, in that moment, I've not actually shared this with anybody publicly, but I literally, in that moment, when I was actually had the tears, Piers, I had this, I can feel it in my body now as I share it. I was at the bottom of this spiral. It's like a spiral, basically, of human beings that I've met and known over the last 5 years that just literally spiraled up to the sky. I could see every face and just went up on the thermals, literally. And it was just, and my upper head is tingling now as I share this with you. It was so clear, but I literally in that moment wasn't there.
Yeah.
In that moment, I wasn't there. I was at the bottom of that spiral. Like, and that's really funny you mention it, because as I think back to that moment, I literally was not there.
And it's, in a way, it's very ethereal, obtuse, weird talking like this, right? But listeners, you too are having those little experiences. You may not be quite noticing them like, Garry did, right? But I call it kind of, when we work with people looking for ordinary miracles. So just to put this into a bit more day to day, there'll be little moments in your day. It might be when you're just having a cup of tea. It might be just when you're just waking up in the morning. It might be when you're going for a run or something. And what we're describing here is the self will just disappear. You will lose yourself. That's even the phrase we use. Oh, I lost myself in that. It might be an activity. It might be when you sing or when you play sport or whatever it is. You lose yourself and the self dissolves. Now, the reason the self dissolves is it's only ever an activity of consciousness anyway. It's never actually an entity. We treat it as an entity, but it's actually an activity. So, and when that dissolves in those little tiny moments, it might only be 5 seconds, 10 seconds, there's a beautiful feeling that comes through. Now, Garry, you're describing a slightly, more felt experience of that, and it had some visual and all that kind of stuff. And some people will have had even more extremes of those. Usually in an NDE, when they near-death experience, people will have bigger versions of what you're talking about. But just to get this back down to the day-to-day, I would urge people to spot in their day just tiny moments that normally the personal conceptual mind kind of, sort of glosses over. We don't notice. When that self dissolves, because that's the space we're talking about. That's the space we're talking about. Because if you're in that space more, not only do you get a beautiful feeling, but because it's a space in between thought, that's when new perspectives comes through and insights like you've been saying, Garry, that have been happening for you the last 18 months. You're seeing new things about the connectedness. Oh, wow, I'm seeing that my iPhone is this. That comes from that space. It's not coming in that moment, that space, because that space is nothing. But then from that, you'll have an insight about something. Would that be reconciling with your experience?
It is, and I would say, and I'd love to add to your invitation for your listeners today that this is a felt thing. That experience I shared is a very deeply felt experience. They are happening every day. So my invitation for your listeners are those moments where you feel something in your body, in your head, the back of your spine, back of your neck. Sit in that and embody that and feel that. Like, what's going on in the moment? What you surrounded by? What are you doing? Because as we sense into that, that's where I found a lot of the goodnesses in the work that you've brought, is the embodiment of that feeling and learning what your body's actually saying, and not just discounting it as, I just had a rush in the back of the head, which I would have done 18 years ago. I just had a buzzy moment. Oh, that was great. Wicked. I had a buzzy moment. No, actually, what is your body telling you in that moment?
Yeah.
What's the insight that's coming through potentially with that? And that's something that's quite new for me, Piers. I just wanted to offer that as well.
No, that's a very good point. And, I sort of talk about noticing with people, a neutral noticing, but because we don't want to then make stories up about stuff. Because even, if we're going to get really semantic, pedantic for a moment, we would describe it as the body feeling it. But, at one level, it's not the body. The body is a label we give to something. You're feeling consciousness, you're feeling source, you're feeling everythingness and nothingness at the same time, right? So what you are experiencing in that lovely felt sensation, which we put a name like a tingle or a whatever or a whoosh or, is just part of being alive and part of being in this system, this we've called the universe, right? And it's all coming from that. Now we would go localize that and going, that's the body. It's not really the body, right? It's not really the body. Now, if you want a better idea of this, look at babies and animals, because they feel things, they sense things, don't they? They're sensing. Horses, particularly children, they sense. And earlier we were talking about that space you can come from when you're an activist or a protester or having a cause. This is what we're talking about, I think, there's almost like a hidden currency, and I was never aware of this, that we're giving off. Whether it's between the police and the protesters, there's a different, and we get so decalibrated from it that we can't tell. And I think what you've been leaning into in the last couple of years is those sensing moments you've had, which make you bring this wonderfulness, aliveness, that brings insights about what to do for you and for the world, come with a different frequency almost, if we use that, don't they? Which most of us are just blind to, deaf to. But you're just tuning in. You're more calibrated to it. Awake, to use a trite word, more awake.
Yeah, I guess so, Piers, as you say. And isn't it funny? Because I remember when we first met, like, I didn't get it. Not that I need to get anything, but when we first met, like, I remember one of these things, just for the listeners again joining us. I remember you going, that thing, it's not yellow. I'm going, what are you on about? It's not yellow. It is yellow. I can see it's yellow. You're like, yeah, but it's not really yellow. And I'm just like, what?
Real but never true, right? It's yeah. So, and this is why, this conversation can lose people so quickly, which I realize we might be doing now, but hey, let's see what happens. But because we're not saying here that what we experience in our moment-to-moment realities isn't real for us. It's absolutely real. It's vivid, and suffering is real. We're not trying to belittle that. We're not trying to write that off. We're not being disrespectful to that. It's real. We live in a real sentient experience. It's just not what it looks like. So we're saying there's something else available. There's fresh perspective, fresh thought. There's no direct causal power in the outside. And once you start to see that, you can live life more gracefully, and you can navigate with greater insight and wider perspective, which is where you're getting to. You're seeing, wow, you're seeing the system differently. And that, that's available for anyone. And although it might sound like 18 months is a long time, it's not really, percentage-wise of being alive, it's not that long. And it's a non-linear change as well, isn't it? So it's never a steady kind of graph. So I think it's just great, Garry, where you've come from or heading to, and that's available for anyone. It's so hopeful without getting too attached to that, I would say. So Garry, what is it? And I'm going to ask you a question that you can't answer, but if you glance down the next 6, 12, 18 months, 2 years for you, what do you think is going to be going on for you? Not that you can ever know, but what do you guess? Where do you think you might end up? What kind of work do you think you might be, or interest do you think you'll be getting into?
Yeah, it's one of the things I'm working on at the moment is actually around what I'm calling a conscious chemicals community. So actually, how do you bring together open-hearted, open-minded humans that work in the industry that I work within? Yeah,
just be clear on chemicals. I'm not talking about kind of drugs and stuff. We're talking about the industry, conscious chemicals. You'll go ayahuasca or whatever.
Yeah,
no, you're talking about
your Breaking Bad type, but not killing people. So I work within the chemicals industry, which is chemical ingredients that go into everything that we touch, eat, smell, wear, as of today. And that's a sector, Piers, that today is very extractive in terms of its operating, in terms of its raw materials, in terms of how it's led. So my belief and my hope, and using all the stuff we've discussed today, is to try and bring an increased level of consciousness to the sector of which I'm part, which just means, are we aware of, as I described with the mobile phone earlier on, would we seek the upgrade every 6 months of our mobile phone if we knew how that phone ended up in our hands, where the materials came from, what the displacement was to tribes and to, land rights, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to be, in the next few years, in that conversation more, and helping be a vehicle, a vessel for healing, whatever that means. I don't know what it means. I don't know how it has to arrive, but myself as well. Actually, what's happened, if I may share as well, Piers, of course, I had testicular cancer last March, almost a year to the day. I had my right testicle removed, March the 19th, 2020.
Wow.
And that was my example of a near-death experience. But what was interesting, and this is really this is an in-the-moment reflection share, not part of our plan today, Piers. Me learning, experiencing quality of mind with you 18 months ago. I share this with a number of people. I navigated my testicle going from a pea-sized lump on the 20th of January 2020 to being the weight and size of a hockey ball by the time it was removed in 8 weeks.
Wow.
Incredibly aggressive growth. I navigated that 8-week period, 12-week period with, I don't know, a grace, it wasn't easy, but it was a relative ease. It was a relative grace. It was a relative, I understand how my experience works now. It's my thinking. So I can either be, my world's going to end, oh my God, my world's going to end, and be on this incredible roller coaster, or I can try and navigate that experience with a bit more grace and a bit more, I don't know, just aliveness. And I've had a couple of days of oh my God, yeah, this could be the last day. It's quite natural. But I navigated it, and I think you'd use it's more of a sailing through that experience than a rowing against the wind. And I would not have been able to have done that had I not had experienced quality of mind. So I just wanted to share that with you and thank you for that experience.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Garry. It's any example where it's, real, life gets real, it's a contact sport, life, and, stuff happens to us in the body mind that, we have to deal with. And it's great. I think it makes so much sense for people to hear that and go, oh, wow, okay, so it's not just a Sunday afternoon, this understanding. It's not just a nice thing when there's fair weather. And also, what was dawning on me as you were getting clearer and clearer for me as you were talking about that is how, because people might think, well, what, people who don't understand quality of mind, they might go, what is this thing that can help people have, thoughts about how to shift an industry to be more sustainable or to dissolve the isms in the world and help someone go through a personal cancer or illness scare, right? Well, what's the one, how can one thing do all of that? Now, to you and I, it looks pretty obvious why one thing can do all that, because everything is the mind, right? So whether it's a very personal thing for you in your life and your own health, or it's something about the systemic way that society constructs itself or business constructs itself, it's all the mind. So of course one understanding can help. But it's just such a great example, what we've shared in this podcast, going from the hugely meta and granular to the very specific for you, and how the same thing is being beneficial.
It's a lovely summary, Piers, because the thing I laugh a lot about at the moment, the number of HR, leadership, culture, again, we're making life playful, yeah. So this is also a key part of this experience, having some play in amongst all of what seems to be mad. Yeah. That's one thing. The second thing is, everyone's talking about there's no magic bullet, but guess what? There actually is. Yeah. It's there's no magic bullet. There's no magic bullet for this. There's no magic bullet for that. Well, actually there is, and we're already it. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah, and actually the magic bullet is sort of right under our nose that we can't see, but we've been conditioned to make it more complicated than that and to look outside for it. And it reminds me, that there's some of my old friends, Mara Gleason, who does One Solution, which is I think I've pointed that to you, Garry, before, and put it in the show notes about how they're looking to change some of the world's major issues through this understanding. And that's exactly what they're saying. One solution, it's the same thing, but almost that doesn't it feel too easy to, well, if it was that easy, we would have done it. So we're not trying to say this is easy, but I think it's simple. Right? It's simple. It's not always easy to see because of the nature of the mind, but it's simple. It's simple.
It's beautiful. And I'm getting an upper body reaction as you shared that, because it is, you're right. It's not easy because we've been conditioned to overcomplicate. Yeah. That's the reality. We've been, everything in every system today is based on complexity. So to get a house, you take a loan, you need a credit score, you need a job to be able to afford. It's just it's incredibly complex when actually you turn and go, but to navigate life, it just requires me just living in the moment and just being kind and loving. And like, that really is it. Like when you strip everything back, like we are one. We are one. We are connected. We come from love. We don't come from fear. So get curious.
and then those to your point though, even those processes in life, buying a house or doing something which require steps, you have to do this and you do this, you do this, you do this. They don't feel, although there are steps to do, they don't feel onerous and complex. You just do take them one bit at a time. You're like, well, we'll do that, we'll do that, right? So it's not saying we want everything to be basic and unsophisticated, because there's some lovely things that come in the world of form from sophistication and complexity. So it's about how they turn up for us. And if you think about it, because some things are, the systems are complex. So it's about being able to see that and the felt experience of that complexity, I think, and just taking it one moment at a time rather than trying to take it all on. So yeah, it's very fascinating. So Garry, we're getting towards the end of time. I'm just trying to think, we've been everywhere on this podcast. I think, how do we sum this up? Because we've been in a useful way, I think, or to every aspect, from the very personal individual right up to the meta. So what I don't know, does anything occur to you now to sort of try and round this off for people?
I want to thank you for the last comment you make. It's a really good point. Like, all systems are complex. Every system is complex. Our body system, networks, everything is complex. But how we navigate them is, do we do it with simplicity, or do we do it with deep attachment to outcome? And I think that's probably quite a nice summary, actually, to be honest, of the discussion is, do we allow ourselves to navigate life with ease and with curiosity and with wonder, or do we have to be clenched fist, I'll be okay when? So that's probably how I'd summarize it.
Yes. Which is where we started, really, about what you've been seeing. And I think, because what determines that, whether we navigate with ease and grace, or whether we do it sort of very attached and invested in with a tight fist, is the aperture or space we come from. And because once that shifts, that's what makes the difference between those two, whether it's on an individual issue for someone or it's seeing a systemic issue. So that is the core of it, isn't it, really? And I suppose if we were suggesting anything for anyone listening here, is to get curious about the difference between those two. And the ordinariness of the wider aperture, which we can all have, and seeing when we get caught out by that, which often we do invisibly because we can't tell, because of our conditioning, because of the normalization, because of the attribution, the misattribution to the outside world. So suggesting to people to get curious as to what they have when they realize they're not the movie. What true I is not the movie, even the self's part of the movie, but when they realize what the screen is and that space, what comes from there, and that's available for all of us at any moment.
I love that. And if I may just add a final thing, and it's only coming up for me in the moment again, Piers, right now, the glue between those two areas is play. Like, yeah, it's a curiosity and so actually, like, when it feels serious or it feels really, really overwhelming, get playful and curious with it. Actually, how can you lighten that and try and investigate it without believing it's going to end you? That's
the inbuilt warning device, isn't it? That when things feel heavy and contracted and sticky and serious, and it's a clue that your aperture is contracting, and the lightness and playfulness is a clue that the aperture is expanding. That's the way to navigate. Not what the world looks like. It's what it feels like from the space. So Garry, I'll put some in the show notes. Your podcast. So the Activating Consciousness podcast. Are you? What's your latest website and stuff like that? Are you? Or is it just a podcast at the moment? What's the best thing to point people to? They want to know more about your work.
No, thank you, Piers. I really appreciate you get me back on, and thanks for all your work as well. It's incredible. So I would say you can find me on most platforms. This will make Piers laugh. My handle is Vulnerable Garry, Vulnerable Garry. You can find me with that on Instagram, find me there on LinkedIn. And you can also find, I've got my own website as well, Garry Turner, one word, .life. And yeah, just very happy to chat. I really care about us all healing, really, whatever that means to us. So I'm looking forward to some interesting conversation, feedback, and our chat today, Piers.
Beautiful. And is there anything, that conscious chemicals thing, is there a website for that? Because people might be interested in that. Is there a URL for that yet?
There's not, but actually, thank you for asking the question. I do now have, I've got quite a lot of content. I've done a lot of speaks, talks, and podcasts with other people. So I've got a YouTube channel now with a lot of content, including the introduction to that conscious chemicals community idea. So if it's okay, Piers, I'll share a link to that as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Garry, thank you so much for your time. Our conversations can go everywhere and could last forever. So let's hope people find something in this, and please, reach out if they do. So thank you, everyone. Have fun being curious, and see you next time.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please reach out and leave us a review and a comment. If you want more info, check out makingchangework.co.uk or Piers Thurston on LinkedIn.